Neil Holloway is one of Microsoft's 10 most powerful bosses. Watch what happens when his management team greet each other. They don't adjust their height. But look, when they shake hands with Neil, they give a slight dip of the head. They're acknowledging his seniority.
Welcome to the UK.
Even though he's one of a new breed of non-hierarchical business leaders.
You've got to have empathy, and you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the employee. And if you do that, they'll open up much easier.
So when someone doesn't dip their head to Neil, what happens? This delegate is being quite familiar because he pats Neil on the shoulder. Neil isn't having it. He asserts himself and comes back with a double pat. Now that's a power tell. It's similar to what Tom Cruise did to assert himself. And what Al Gore did to George Bush.
Maybe I should briefly explain.
Notice Neil's gestures. Watch for the power tells. At first glance, it looks like he's using his hands to shield himself, but he's actually presenting his knuckles. It's a disguised way of being dominant.
But we have to say what our goals are.
It's exactly the gesture we saw Tony Blair using when he addressed the Labour Party conference. It's not the only gesture that these two bosses share. Neil uses the two-handed stab to ram home the points he's making. This is also a dominant gesture. We can see this because the wrists are stiff rather than bent. It's another gesture we've seen used by Tony Blair. The success of Neil's leadership style can be measured by looking at the tells of his audience. Most of them are producing attentiveness displays. They're covering their mouth, an action that's inconsistent with talking. It's therefore an unconscious, respectful way of showing Neil that they have no intention of taking over the speaker role.
For the enterprise selling business.
At Microsoft's management meeting, no one's giving orders, but it's obvious who's in charge.
When you go down for a cup of coffee, guess what? You've got to almost act slightly differently. But again, if you, depending on how you talk to that person as well, if you're empathetic and you're talking the same language, you can just as easily be part of the crowd, and they love that, and then they also love you being the leader.
Here's an informal conversation where all three men are standing with their hands on their hips. This is a dominance posture. Somebody's going to have to give way. Neil makes his move. He points at one of the other people and symbolically pushes him down. This has the desired effect because the other person folds his arms. Neil is now able to continue talking unchallenged. Even when they are being informal, the people here are constantly reaffirming their status positions in relation to each other. Most of the time people don't know they're doing this, but they can't help themselves. The tells take over.